All right. I think let's start then. Welcome everyone to our second webinar this month after last week's sector expansion meeting. This meeting is about RSB's new additionality approach, and yeah, we look forward to sharing a bit the thinking around our new additionality approach, why we have implemented it. And yeah, I'm looking forward really to sharing this information with you. It has been in the making for a while, and I think it's a very important piece to drive book and claim further. So giving you a quick overview of the agenda. 1 second. There you go. So I will give a quick introduction from concept to clarity, how additionality is changing. So, by the way, my name is Max Eichbaum. I'm Associate Director, Digital Solutions and Book and Claim at the RSB. Then I'm joined by my colleague, Jill Alker, who will then do the second part in introducing RSB new approach to regulatory additionality. So really helping you to explain how it works, how it's going to be implemented, and what is the value proposition. And then we have two guests today, who are Aaron Robinson from IAG, coming from the aviation sector, and then also Louise Dobler from NORDEN and from the shipping sector to also share their perspective on the new additionality approach, why it's important to advance on that topic, and yeah, why they supported our work. Then what's next? And then if we have enough time, there will be then an open Q&A at the end. Right, so without further ado, let's dive into the presentation. Next slide, please. Many of you have seen this slide many times before. I cannot assume that everyone has heard about book and claim, so I quickly wanted to give an introduction. Also, if I retire one day and have to remind myself on, one specific slide back from that time, it would be that slide probably. So what is book and claim? What we see today, or what we have seen in the past with mass balance supply chains, that there is a strong restriction and complexity to get sustainability or sustainable fuels to end clients, and that is because the supply is very regional and then the demand is very scattered around the world. So it makes no sense to ship fuel to customers around the world when the goal is to reduce emissions, and this is where the RSB started to investigate how a book and claim system could help with that situation. How does book and claim work? Well, we have regional fuel supply. The supplier then uses a registry to surrender the proof of sustainability. A proof of sustainability captures all the sustainability information of the fuel, puts that POS on the registry, and sells the fuel locally as conventional fuel. So that means the sustainability claims, they continue to live on a registry, and the registry can then be used to virtually transfer the claims to any clients in the world, allowing then those clients to make scope 1 and scope emission reduction claims. In our registry, we call them book and claim units, and one book and claim unit represents 1 metric ton of NEAT certified product. So this is the general concept of book and claim, very quickly explained. Next slide, please. And to implement a credible and trustworthy book and claim solution, the RSB has developed the RSB book and claim system. It's composed of the RSB book and claim manual, the RSB book and claim recognition, and the RSB book and claim registry. The RSB book and claim manual is a normative guidance on how book and claims should be implemented in different sectors. Right, so there are sectoral requirements on implementing this approach, making sure that the decoupling is happening very credible, and that there's no double claiming happening or double issuance happening, and then also that the transfer and the retirement of these claims are properly managed in a traceable environment. So the manual has established the rules on how this should be implemented in in aviation, and we are working on a shipping implementation at the moment. While working in book and claim over the last years and the development of the manual and also the registry, we realized there is a need of harmonization. So we developed the RSB book and claim recognition for other registries, to showcase that they're also complying with the RSB book and claim manual rules, but also fulfilling minimum system requirements. The intention here really is to harmonize the space, making sure that we work always all towards the same direction, making sure that we create a credible and trustworthy system, because the reputation of book and claim, and specifically operating in the voluntary market, is very critical. So it is our highest intention really to make sure that we all make sure that we do not cut corners and harm the reputation of book and claim, making sure that it is perceived as a very credible and trustworthy system. And then the RSB registry, which is then used to record the BCU registrations, but then also managing the transfers and the retirements and making sure that certain information are public for robustness and visibility, but then also making sure that especially this decoupling of sustainability attributes from the physical product is properly managed, and that assets such as emission reduction claims are not just created out of thin air. Next slide, please. To achieve this credibility very quickly, you can see in the center the RSB book and claim system components. We always start with the pilots to better understand the use case in the industry. But then when we have made updates to the RSB book and claim menu, we go into a stakeholder consultation and discuss the updates with the wider RSB member community to make sure that also others can challenge what has been implemented, and that the implementation also speaks to a wider audience. So not only to the companies or partners that were involved in the pilot, but also to others that then, when the manual has been updated, they also can use the modifications in their use case. It is a continuous improvement process, and that means we have a wider ecosystem approach here as well, making sure that we collaborate and align with other like-minded initiatives. We are in constant exchange with Greenhouse Gas Protocol and SBTi, and also we have our RSB Academy to work on capacity building, helping to train the right people to use the system and understand how it works. And then also we work on registry interoperability, which is another big topic. RSB is involved in making sure that also outside our registry, we develop an ecosystem that works together and communicates with each other to overcome certain system challenges such as double counting. Next slide, please. One more click, please. Here, a quick overview of the evolution of the RSB book and claim system, and it clearly shows you, how long RSB has been already working on this, and it started even earlier, right? The first book and claim manual was already issued in 2015. However, the appetite and interest wasn't really there back then, and then in 2021, we pulled it out of our drawer, the first manual, and continued working on it because we really saw the opportunity to drive a change in the aviation sector, having some first aviation pilots in 21, trying to better understand on how book and claim could work in that specific sector. Then we worked in 22 on 7 pilots really to get a wider perspective on how to shape the system, and have been very much engaged with global initiatives. In 23, we launched then the web application of the registry. We also initiated the recognition procedure and have been updating the manual constantly over the last years. Then in 24, after having launched the registry, we went into a consolidation phase, making sure that the operational aspects are also properly managed, and updating again the manual with some small modifications, and having also then launched our interoperability research to really understand how we can tackle double issuance and make this entire space more trustworthy and more accessible to stakeholders. And then this year expansion, and as you can see in bolded colors, new additionality approach implemented in Book and Claim 4.2. So let's dive then into the additionality subject. So what is additionality? Additionality is a principle that a specific intervention results in outcomes that would not have occurred in its absence. On the right-hand side, you can see a graph with a trajectory of emission reductions over time. This could be, for instance, a regulatory requirement that over a certain time of period, a specific sector has to reduce its emission, as we have seen in aviation. And additionality in this context would be then any additional demand that has been created to the already mandated demand. So ultimately then driving a quicker emission reduction and then achieving a goal quicker in time than it would have been originally just by the mandate. So the activity is additional if it causes a real measurable difference beyond what would have been happened anyway, such as through a mandate. Next slide, please. So what are the challenges with the current approach? And in the current approach, or in the up to manual version 4.1, the requirement was that in the RSB claim system, fuel needs to be fully additional. It cannot have any link to mandates or couldn't be used under any mandates. It should be fully additional. And that's the reason also why our book and claim system has been operational fully in the voluntary market. So what are the challenges with that approach? Well, it's too interventionist. It imposes limits to the market where actually the market should take over. The demand over the last decades was driven via mandates and helped with technical readiness. But what we are witnessing now is a transition from a mandated driven demand to a market driven demand in addition to mandated demand. And yeah, we want to activate the market even more and give more flexibility to help the market to become more present. It's underutilization, so ignores larger enabling opportunity. As I mentioned, we want to activate the market. If mandates, credits, and other policies can be considered in a different additionality approach, then it means there is the potential of staking the premium that needs to be paid for sustainable aviation fuel. So if we allow staking, that means each individual would need to contribute less to the premium and makes the emission reduction via SAF a more appealing solution. And then there's disparity. Well, what we have seen as well is that there is an imbalance on how incentives and mandates are treated in the book and claim system and under our previous additionality approach. And that is to give you an example, in the US, we have the carrot approach with the incentives, and in the EU, we have the mandate approach, which is usually called the stick approach. Under the old additionality approach, incentives were accepted, and the fuel was eligible to be used in the RSB book and claim system. Fuel that was used towards mandates in the EU wasn't, and this creates some disparity between different regions. And we think this is a role we don't want to own, and it's rather the market that needs to decide what degree of additionality they want to support. Next slide, please. So I mentioned already, we transition now from a fully additional approach to an inclusive additionality approach. On the left-hand side, I copied an old slide, right, an old relic from the early book and claim days at the RSB, highlighting that before we were following the atmospheric benefit principle, so that, as I explained before, any additional demand needs to go beyond already a compliance obligation or mandated or already mandated compliance obligations. What we do now is we have developed a decision tree to help evaluate what that policy regulation or a mandate is about, and then want to make sure also that this is very transparently communicated in the retirement statement so that the end client knows ultimately what they're going to buy. So helping with the decision-making process, what level of additionality the current incentive mandated situation represents, but then also making sure that all of this is very transparently communicated in the retirement statement is part of the update in the manual version 4.2. Next slide, please. So to summarize, so what are the benefits of this inclusive additionality approach we are going to introduce in the new book and claim manual version 4.2? Well, it's market-led. It lets the market decide what value of additionality they want to support, right? So they could still say, well, we want to have only fully additional fuel, and that means ultimately they would also need to be open to the idea to pay a bit of a premium than when it comes to the emission reductions they will receive. Broader access includes fuels under both mandates and incentives. Mentioned the US example. So that would now include also the mandates in EU that can be used under our new additionality approach. It is scalable, it expands supply and accelerates uptake because, as I mentioned, we can now better state the different contributions by the stakeholders when it comes to paying for the premium that is needed for renewable fuels. It is transparent. Everything is clearly communicated and required to be communicated in the retirement statement. It bridges policy and corporate actions, and it's impact focused. And this will be my last comment. That has been addressed in the past that airlines said, well, I have the option to buy stuff if I can get, a contribution from corporate end clients. But if there is a fully additional requirement in a book and claim system, well, then it means, there's a limitation for me. That means, under a policy or regulatory scheme, I may just opt then for carbon credit if I cannot get the support from corporate end clients or from scope 3 claimants to help with the premium payment, right? So we don't win anything then if the alternative becomes then again a conventional offset to mitigate emissions, and we saw the opportunity now to correct this with this inclusive additionality approach. And I will hand now over to Jill, our book and claim manager, to explain in more detail on how we have implemented this.
Okay, thanks, Max. So for those who don't know me, I'm Jill Olker. I'm the book and claim manager for RSB. The next few slides will be walking through some more of the detail associated with our new approach to regulatory additionality. So the new approach will introduce 4 additionality categories. The first of this we're calling policy free, and as the name suggests, this is where fuel registered into the registry is not involved in any government policy or frameworks of any kind. The second category is what we're currently calling incentive driven, and this is for fuel that's been used to meet the requirements of incentive-based policies. So these first 2 categories are what we already allow within the registry, and it's still possible to transparently purchase book and claim units for fuel that's not been required by law using one of these 2 categories. But there'll be 2 new categories. So the third category is called mandated fuel switching, and this is for fuel that's been used to meet requirements of policies that require a switch of fuel or a reduction in the carbon intensity of that fuel. So examples of those policies include Refuel EU or the Japanese SAF blending targets. And these policies are generally, but not always, imposed on fuel suppliers, so quite early on in the supply chain. And the last category is called regulated climate benefit. And this is for policies that lead more generally to a global benefit. So these include policies such as the ETS, the EU ETS and CORSIA, and they are generally, but not always, applied further down the supply chain to usually the transport service provider or the company that is responsible for the Scope 1 emissions. So to help determine which policy falls into which category, we've developed that decision tree that Max mentioned earlier, and we'll be using this tool together with an industry working group that we're putting together to classify the existing government policies and how they fit into these different categories. We'll also publish a list showing where the current policies fit into the categories, and when new policies are introduced by governments, we'll work with the industry group to review each of those policies and identify which category it belongs to. In the situation where a volume of fuel has been used to meet more than one policy from a different category, then the additionality category with the highest number in this list will be the one that applies. And on the retirement statements, it will be possible to see both the additionality category and all the policies that have been applied. And I'll show you some examples of what the retirement statements will look like a little later on when we go through some examples. So when it comes to policies that place an obligation on transport service providers, so obligations that apply to ship operators and airlines, then we need to add a few extra requirements to make this new approach work effectively. For situations where regulated climate benefit policies have been applied, so for example ETS, and for all situations where the mandated fuel switching policies have been applied and the transport service provider is the obligated party, so for example the Fuel EU maritime policy and the Singapore SAF mandate, in these situations we're proposing to require, firstly, that the decoupling of the physical fuel from its attributes happens no sooner than at the transport service provider level. So you mentioned, if you were at the call last week, you've heard now that we are allowing transport service providers to do that decoupling, and that's what would be required in that situation. Also, that the physical fuel would need to be used by the same transport service providers that registered the BCU, and that the details in all of the mandates and the incentives received through the whole supply chain would need to be collected and tracked using proof of compliance documents, including those applying to the actors further up the supply chain. And importantly, this means that in these situations, the TSP would need to hold RSB book and claim trader certification to ensure that the Scope 3 claims are not also passed on to the individual passengers or customers of the airline or ship operator. It also means that BCUs could only be transferred to corporate end users and logistics service providers, and the transport service providers wouldn't be named on the retirement statements. Instead, airlines and ship operators would use the mass balance chain of custody to track their claim, so using the POSs, proof of sustainability documents, or the POCs, proof of compliance documents, that have been issued to them by their suppliers. So I'm just going to go through this in a little bit more detail, but this slide takes a closer look at how we manage and prevent a specific type of double counting, which could be introduced by some of these changes. And we do this by using two existing chain of custody rules. So rule number one is, and this is under the mass balance chain of custody rules, number one is a POS can only be issued once. And rule number two is, and this is under the book and claim chain of custody rules, the rule is that the POS must be surrendered to the registry and cannot be used again. So in this first example on the screen, I'm going to just perhaps use my pointer. Here, the sustainability chain is demonstrated by a proof of sustainability document, and each link in the chain, the previous actor passes a POS onto the next actor, and so on through the chain. And as you can see in this scenario, the POSs are only being issued once from one actor to the next. The second example shows a rule violation, where the mass balance and book and claim have been incorrectly combined. So here, the supplier has mistakenly both registered a book and claim unit and passed a POS onto the transport service provider. In doing so, they've either issued two POSs, as I've shown on the screen, or they failed to surrender a single POS to the registry. Because this TSP doesn't realise that the supplier has already transferred the scope 3 through to a corporate buyer, the TSP could also pass that same claim onto a corporate end user, and this creates a clear case of double counting. But if these rules are properly applied and followed and audited, then this kind of double counting should not occur. So the third example shows how the supplier should have handled this situation if they intended to sell the scope 3 to a corporate end user. They should register the BCU in the registry, surrender the POS, and then supply the physical fuel to the TSP without a POS, instead issuing book and claim units to the TSP. And this tells the TSP that the scope 3 claim has already been allocated elsewhere. And in this case, the transport service provider can't use the fuel for regulatory compliance because they haven't received it on a mass balance basis, so they haven't received a POS. And finally, the last example shows the correct use for when the transport service provider would like to use the fuel for regulatory compliance. The supplier sells the physical fuel with a POS to the transport service provider. That POS can then be submitted to the regulator, and corresponding proof of compliance, or POC, can be used in the registry to transfer the scope 3 claim to a corporate end user. And I'll explain what a POC is and how it can be used in a moment. So just to recap, these are the rules again that keep this whole process working. Only POSs and POCs demonstrate sustainability claims using mass balance chain of custody. A POS can only be issued once. If a POS has been issued to a regulator for compliance, then a POC can be issued, and that can be used then to pass the sustainability claim down the supply chain. A POC contains all the information provided in a POS, as well as details about why that POS is not available, so that whether it's been submitted to an X regulator to meet Y policy. A book and claim retirement statement can be used to demonstrate sustainability using book and claim chain of custody, but it can't be used to demonstrate sustainability using mass balance chain of custody. And currently, regulators require sustainability to be demonstrated using mass balance only, and hence they require the submission of a POS or a POC, but not a retirement statement. For book and claim transactions, POSs or POCs must be surrendered to the registry and not used again. And this is what a proof of compliance or POC looks like. So a POC must be used whenever a proof of sustainability has been already surrendered to a regulator as evidence of compliance with a specific policy. In most respects, a POC includes the same information as a POS. It includes the feedstock details, the GHG savings, certification, and so on. But you'll notice at the top, there is an additional section, and this section includes the underlying POS number, a statement explaining why the POS itself isn't available, so confirmation that it's been submitted to X regulator for Y policy, and a signed declaration confirming that the issuer is authorised to transfer the sustainability characteristics into the book and claim registry, even without access to the original POS. And this last point is crucial. This ensures that the responsibility for ensuring that it's legitimate to make both a regulatory compliance claim and a book and claim claim sits with the issuer of the POC. So I'm going to pause now to walk through a few quick examples and make this a little bit more real of where fuel can be used to meet both regulations and also used in the book and claim system. So for example 1, let's assume that a SAF fuel supplier has used the fuel to meet a mandated fuel switching policy. So for example, the Japan fuel blending mandate. So they'll have needed to issue a POS to the policy administrator. That will create a POC and they'll submit that to the registry and create a book and claim unit. The physical fuel is sold locally to a nearby airport without any sustainability claims, and the book and claim unit is transferred to an air carrier and then on to a corporate end user. And here you can see this would be what the bottom of the retirement statement would look like. And here, I don't know whether you can see this. You can see that we've labelled the additionality category as mandated fuel switching, and the policies applied would be the Japan blending mandate. So it's all completely transparent to the buyer, both the policy that is applied and also the category under which that policy sits. And here's another example. In this case, the transport service provider has used the fuel to meet the needs of a regulated climate benefit policy. So for example, CORSIA. And as I mentioned earlier, for all situations where a regulated climate benefit policy has applied, it's only possible for the transport service provider to register the BCU. And so in this example, the air carrier would need to hold the BCU trade certification. They would issue the POS to CORSIA and submit a POC to the registry stating that the fuel has been used for CORSIA purposes. The airline can use a POS to make their Scope 1 claim, and the airline isn't mentioned on the retirement statement, only the Scope 3 claimant would be named. And here is the retirement statement for that example. And you can see that it's really clear that the fuel has been used to meet a regulated climate benefit policy. And in this case, the policy is CORSIA. Example 3, this time we've got a maritime example. And this is where the fuel's been used by a ship operator to meet both the Fuel EU maritime requirements and also to meet the EU ETS. So the POS would be submitted to the Fuel EU maritime admins. A POC is generated and submitted to the EU ETS admins. A second POC declaring both the Fuel EU maritime and the ETS is submitted to the registry to create BCUs. And then again, because the TSP has registered the units, the retirement would only include the Scope 3 claimant, and the POS would be used by the ship operator to meet their Scope 1 claim. And as you can see, the Scope 3 claimant would then only be able to use the fuel for their requirements. And as you can see, we've got climate benefit as the additionality category, and both Fuel EU Maritime and EU ETS have been named on the retirement statement. And then finally, the fourth example, here we've got fuel that's been used by the fuel supplier to meet the Refuel EU mandate, and also by the air carrier to meet the EU ETS. And what would happen here is that the POS gets submitted to the Refuel EU admin. A POC is generated by the supplier that declares that the POS has been surrendered to the regulator, and this POC is supplied to the air carrier. The air carrier then submits that POC to the ETS administrator and then creates another POC which then declares both the Refuel EU and the ETS has been applied and submits that to the registry to create a BCU. And again, the retirement would only be for the Scope 3 claimant. And here you can see that it mentions regulated climate benefit and that the Refuel EU and EU ETS policies have applied. So there'll be some time for questions at the end if anybody has any, but for now I'm just going to move on to a discussion session. So the first discussion is with Aaron Robinson, and I recorded this first thing this morning. Aaron Robinson he unfortunately couldn't join us today. He's in a meeting in Geneva, but he was very generous and donated some time first thing this morning to record this session with me. Aaron is the Vice President of Sustainable Aviation Fuel in the US and globally for the International Airlines Group, and is responsible for SAF purchasing, policy and corporate sustainability partnerships for the group's carriers, British Airways, Iberia, Aer Lingus, Vueling and Level. So I'm going to start the presentation. Good morning, Aaron. Thanks for joining us today. You were part of the consultation on the RSB book and claim updates recently and have helped us shape these changes over the years. Could you start by sharing your general reaction to the changes we're proposing, especially around additionality and registry access for transport service providers such as airlines?
Thanks, Jill. Good to be with you today. I was quite pleased with the direction of the changes, both for regulatory additionality, which we'll talk about more in a moment, and the ability of transport service providers to register directly. That direct registration is important because our suppliers more and more often are not actual producers. So having flexibility to register where we want, which registry, and also when we actually receive it is becoming increasingly important.
Great, and we talked about the TSP registration last week, so this is great timing. How important is it for airlines like IAG to have the kind of flexibility around regulatory additionality that this new approach will bring?
Yeah, so for decades, airline growth has really been powered by the idea of having a wide range of price points and service points that meet them. And aside from the price benefit that this creates for our customers, on the order of $70 to $80 per ton of CO2 equivalent, this flexibility actually enables the same concept for them. They can more freely choose what level of regulatory additionality they're comfortable with, and many have been doing so already. So ultimately, this change is going to enable a wider range of SAF to become economically viable, and it unlocks at the same time a higher volume to help us decarbonize faster than before.
Fantastic. So the idea of publishing all our retirements in a public retirement table is central to our transparency approach. What role do you think that kind of openness brings in building trust across the value chain?
Yeah, so double selling has been a key concern since the start of this marketplace. At an idea level, we're selling the comfort and feeling of low carbon flying. But at a practical level, that idea is underpinned by two things. We're selling a piece of paper that documents that emissions reduction, and we're selling trust. Today, that trust is created by contracts, our brand name, and our reputation. But today, the market has expanded and it's grown more complex. And as a result, that trust needs a deeper certainty to let the market function to its full potential.
Absolutely. So looking at the process, our process, so the consultation, the collaboration, and the changes that we're now introducing, what does RSB's role as a convener and standard setter mean to you? How valuable is that kind of independence, the multi-stakeholder platform that we have in helping the whole sector move towards a credible, scalable SAF deployment system?
Yeah, so I first began working with RSB back in 2010. This is when the RSB principles were first released. Fundamentally, RSB's mission is the exact same as mine. It's about creating trust and confidence. And the best way to achieve this is through transparency, number one, but also taking into account, in fact, that wide range of views. And that's what RSB has really set out to do.
Thank you. And finally, if you could share one message with policymakers or corporate buyers that are watching this webinar, what would it be? What lessons have you learned that might be valuable to help others in this system as it evolves?
Yeah, so I think sustainable aviation fuel, it can be an extremely complex topic. When I first started working directly with SAF Supply nearly a decade ago, the market was very simple in comparison. There was one producer globally, and I was the only active buyer. Today, there's probably around 15 producers, perhaps 100 buyers, and maybe now this third level of end user demand, which is hundreds or maybe even thousands of end customers that creates this other dimension. At the same time, similarly, to make an aircraft fly, it's an incredibly complicated process. Our objective in this space, I think everyone's objective really, is we want to make low emissions flying the same as flying has been historically. We want to make it something easy, and we want to make it something that's every day.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today, Aaron. I wish you a very good rest of your day. I know you've got a very busy day, and we do appreciate you joining us so early in the morning. And thank you very much for your time. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry I couldn't be with you live for this, but happy to be able to contribute.
Wonderful. Okay, so we just have another discussion now. So that was a really helpful perspective from the aviation sector. Now I'd like to introduce Louise Dobler, who would like to give the perspective from a maritime operator. So Louise is the decarbonisation manager at NORDEN, where she's got a strong focus on developing climate solutions. She led in the development of NORDEN's book and claim solution and is involved in discussions on the topic across the ecosystem, including with the book and claim community and the Catalyst registry. So welcome again, Louise. I have some similar questions for you, but this time obviously with a focus on maritime. So could we start again by, if you could share your general reaction to the changes that we're proposing, especially around additionality and registry access for transport service providers such as ship operators?
Yeah, thank you, Jill, and thanks for having me on the webinar. Yeah, I mean, two important changes, I think, for us as a shipping transport service provider, so a carrier operator in other terms. The update with regard to transport service provider is key, because then that means that we're able to register BCUs in the registry. I know that RSB's approach to book and claim initially came from the aviation world, and now moving into maritime, that's where it very much makes sense, at least on the maritime side of things, to enable transport service provider to book the BCUs as we are very much involved into. We exactly know what we're bunkering into our tanks, and we're in control of when and how we consume the sustainable maritime fuel. So definitely that's a very welcome update. And then on the additionality updates, I think that's also very welcome. I mean, it's a topic that's very confusing for many, has been, and probably will remain fairly mystifying for a lot of people. So any attempt to bring a bit of clarity in the additionality topic, I think, is in general welcome and great to help educate others and make sure that we speak the same language and we understand each other when we talk about additionality, especially between the registry sellers and buyers. Yeah, I would have loved to see maybe the additionality part going even one step further into kind of drawing a line in the sand and defining where the threshold on additionality lays. I think that would have been that could be helpful for buyers, especially which obviously cannot be experts in all the different regulation and transport modes that they procure low emission transportation for. But nonetheless, I think the current attempts to categorize the different regulation across the different, or aviation and maritime for that matter, is helpful. I mean, we could probably always argue about, is that the right categories? Do the different policies fall into the right categories? I mean, we can most likely have endless discussions about that, and you'll probably never really reach a point where everyone fully agrees. But I think nonetheless, this kind of attempt to categorize, to create some broad category is hopefully helpful to bring clarity.
Great, thank you. How important is it for ship operators like NORDEN to have this kind of flexibility around additionality that the new approach will bring?
Yeah, so for us at NORDEN, it's not something that will massively change how we're doing things for now, because when we're working with the voluntary market, so issuing BCUs for the voluntary market, we go for the full additional approach, at least that's what we do and believe in. So in that sense, the new approach to the RSB additionality isn't gonna kind of impact on what we're doing and what we've been doing so far. But I do think that there's maybe some interest into the how to phrase that. So there's a lot more and more fuel that is being used towards reaching compliance, and that's those that are categorized as then non-additional or in the 3As and 3Bs, if I remember the categories that you put on the table. And so what do we do with those scope 3 emissions that are related to all of those fuels that are being used towards compliance, right? I think there's a potential for using book and claim chain of custody. It's not the voluntary market anymore, but there is some potential for probably using from kind of a mass balance approach from a carrier perspective to be able to allocate nonetheless still that scope 3 that exists from all of that compliance fuel to their physical customer up to the extent that their cargo, their shipment is being exposed to those regulations. I think we need to clearly define or divide those two probably to make sure that they don't get marketed the same way, because these are essentially different products, right? It's the voluntary market versus something that is not voluntary. But I think that's until now it has been probably difficult to implement that because there wasn't really a frame. But then now RSB having those different categories maybe enables to kind of sets this kind of frame that would be helpful for this.
Great. Okay, thank you. So moving on to the question about the public retirement statements, what role do you think this kind of openness plays in building trust across the value chain?
Yeah, I think it's helpful. I mean, as Aaron was saying, at the end of the day, it's a piece of paper, right, that you buy. When you're purchasing a BCU, you're purchasing something that is not physical. It's not like you go to the supermarket and you buy something and you can see it for yourself and you have trust that this is what you bought. So I think as transparent as we can be helps making sure that you're buying the thing that you believe you're buying, because then you have more proofs that actually add up to credibilize this purchase. But I think as well it's just helpful in general to be able to have this public retirement table. In an ideal world, we would have a grand solution for avoiding double counting. There's not really anything that really cuts or covers all corner out there right now, but any attempt again is helpful. And so in that sense, I think that the public retirement can provide some reassurance to buyers. And if it does, then I think that it doesn't harm to have it out there, so long as obviously everything is done properly in terms of data, sensitive data, anonymization, and stuff like that.
Right, okay. We're slightly running out of time, so I'm going to skip the next question and go straight to the final one, if that's okay. That's because I would like to leave a bit of time for space. So finally, if you could just share one message with policymakers or corporates that are watching this webinar, what would it be? So perhaps some lessons that you've learned that might help others in this system.
Yeah. So then that's probably two messages, one for corporate buyers and one for regulators. I guess for corporate buyers, I'll probably remind, at least in the maritime world, we had an opportunity to get a global regulation last month that was postponed by a year, the adoption. So we have Fuel EU, but that's fairly small volumes of sustainable maritime fuel. So book and claim in the meantime is a way to support the maritime industry in the absence of global regulation. The premium for sustainable maritime fuel is high, and so without being able to share that together with customer, that's going to limit the how fast those fuels scale. So very much wanted to bring that message a little bit to the next level for corporate buyers. And then for regulators, I guess that just shows that there is some willingness, and that we're waiting for global regulation. I mean, as much as I live and breathe book and claim, I think nothing beats global regulation. So that's very much being something that I'm very much waiting for. But there's also one angle that I think could be interesting, especially as we're kind of set back 1 year into figuring out this global regulation for maritime. We always associate, I think, book and claim with the voluntary market because that's where it's been used so far. But I think that there's probably some interesting aspects and element of how you apply a book and claim chain of custody that can be embedded into how you actually design a regulation. That can help the regulation just being more effective and scaling the use of alternative fuel more rapidly, and thus reducing intensity more rapidly. So maybe more of a kind of a call to regulators to maybe look into book and claim. It's not just a voluntary instrument. It can really be also used as something in the design of regulations, I believe.
Let's hope they're listening. Thank you, Louise. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully yours and Aaron's insights have been useful to the viewers out there to really understand how these changes that we're implementing will be useful to the industry. So thanks again for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
So just moving on to the last few slides on what happens next in our system, how the changes that we've made will be implemented, and all our standards and procedures and guidance documents can be found in our library on our website. And here you will also find the standard that sets out the procedure for developing and modifying our standards and procedures. So whenever we evolve the book and claim system, this is the process that we need to follow. And the way it works in practice is that we would first go through an industry pilot project like the one we're doing with NORDEN and DHL, who are looking to evaluate a possible update in our standards. In those pilots, which usually last several months, we go into great deals of detail, assessing how the changes could be implemented and what impacts they will have on the system and the industry. And once the pilots have been completed, we submit the new version of the standards or procedures to the members for consultation. We gather that feedback from the wider industry. Then we review the feedback, and based on the responses that we've received, we integrate any changes or tweaks that have been suggested. And finally, we present the final version of the amended standard to the RSB board for approval. Oh, sorry, last point. And this slide just shows the RSB's governance and how we bring together the different diverse stakeholders to guide its work. At the base, we have 5 chambers representing key stakeholder groups, from producers and processors to markets, social equity, environmental stewardship, and government or research. And each chamber elects representatives to the Assembly of Delegates, which acts as the RSB main decision-making body. The board of directors are elected by the Assembly, and they provide the strategic oversight, ensuring accountability and approve major policies and standards. And finally, the executive director and secretariat carry out the board's direction, managing daily operations and coordinating the standards and certification work. Together, this system ensures a balanced representation, transparency and credibility across RSB's governance. So just a quick plug, we've got an annual conference, our annual conference coming up on the 9th to the 11th of December. Here you'll be able to take part in a collaboration day where we'll carry out a number of different workshops and look in detail at some of the things that we've been talking about in these additionality and the webinar that we had last week. The main event is on the second day, where you'll hear from many speakers about lots of different aspects, not just book and claim, but lots of different aspects of our certification schemes. And then on that third day will be that Assembly of Delegates meeting that I mentioned earlier, where the decision-making process associated with our standards and processes will be carried out. And within the agenda, book and claim will feature heavily, including a whole day of workshops including a book and claim 101, maritime expansion, registry recognition, all sorts of other interesting things. And several panel sessions in the flagship day will also include book and claim topics. So do consider joining us for the conference, as well as a well-deserved and work-related early Christmas present to yourself. So I think that wraps up the webinar for today. And hopefully I've squeezed enough time in for 1 or 2 questions. So Max, can I hand back over to you, and perhaps between us we can have a go at some of the questions that are in the Q&A section.
Sure, thank you, Jill. I just was about to respond to the questions directly in the chat and the Q&A, but I can maybe quickly just read them out and say what I have responded. So yes, slides, we can share them. Second question from Christian van der Ridder: Would TSP solely need an RSB book and claim trader certification, or would they also need a valid sustainability scheme certification? So I addressed this question. The only certification the TSP needs is the RSB book and claim trader certification to register the BCUs in the RSB book and claim registry. And we had a question about the intermediary account and if it's accessible for traders. Well, the intermediary account is for companies that are part of the supply or value chain, and that means you're a fuel distributor or supplier that only needs to receive the BCUs and then forwards them to another organization. So this is where an organization would apply for the intermediary account, but it's also for suppliers that have subsidiaries that manage the marketing and commercial activities of selling Scope 3 claims, and for this purpose, we've also implemented this intermediary account where the supplier then can send the BCUs to the intermediary, and then the intermediary can then distribute them to their clients. All right, so I think with that we can wrap up the meeting. I want to give a big thank you to Aaron and Louise for joining us today, to providing their perspective. But also a big thank you to Jill, who has done an excellent job to developing this important piece of how to manage better additionality in a book and claim environment. I think the work we shared today with you just highlights again the innovative nature at the RSB and trying to drive this system forward and helping really with the energy transition. And hope that the solution will be adapted and drives value to everyone that is going to use the RSB book and claim system. So with that, thank you very much also for all the participants for joining us today, for your time, for your interest. And if you have any follow-up questions, please reach out to us and have a nice rest of the day.